Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium Wednesday, August 22nd. I'm doing it early this week because I decided that I needed to give you a heads up about something that's going on, and you may not be connecting the dots on the website. So I wanted to do this a little early and to prepare you for a couple of blogs that are coming up on the website. Now, all this has to do with Ecuador recently offering political asylum to Julian Assange, all right? And with this, the story has changed from one of however you wish to interpret Assange. There's a lot of people now saying that Assange's mother and folks involved him in a cult. Some people are going so far as to say that Assange was involved in a Nazi cult, of course, and all of this is now coming out in the wake of Ecuador's decision to grant Assange political asylum. Now, I want to be very clear. I have not investigated any of those stories, and moreover, I'm not really inclined to, because what Ecuador has done has changed the nature of the game into a geopolitical statement. And the reason why this is significant is before the British government threatened to storm the Ecuadorian embassy and remove Assange by force. Prior to that, there had been negotiation. When Britain made that announcement, Ecuador responded by saying, "We are not a colony, we are giving him asylum." Now, prior to this, President Putin of Russia criticized the West's handling of Assange as being, quote, undemocratic, close quote. So I want to bring you up to speed about some things that have been happening since the decision by Ecuador. If you recall, last week I said that Ecuador's decision probably came after Quito consulted Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, at least. In other words, Ecuador would not have made the moves it made if it had not been assured of backing from the rest of South America, and particularly by the two major South American powers, Argentina and Brazil. Now, we've recently seen in the last week that the Organization of Latin American States has gone on record and supported Ecuador in this decision. So in other words, I'm viewing this as kind of confirmation that prior to Ecuador making that announcement, they had already sounded out the opinions of other South American capitals. And I also said, last week you'll recall, that I believed that Ecuador would not have taken that decision also without quietly consulting with Moscow and Beijing. All right, now this is all backdrop to what has now happened since then. I want to draw your attention to some articles that will be coming up next week on the website, some blogs. One will be concerning the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, and his announcements about Russian defense policy. All right. I want to clue you into something that Medvedev said in that announcement, and that is, and it will be blogged about next week, that is that he stated on the record that Russia was going to develop other capabilities than the conventional ones in responding to increasing Western pressure. And what I believe he was talking about, and he almost comes right out and says this, is that Russia is going to beef up its cyber warfare capability. All right. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to is the item that will be appearing on the 25th, and this is a Russian nuclear submarine that apparently patrolled for an entire month undetected in the Gulf of Mexico. All right, so we have to understand that Russian submarines are patrolling the American coast just as our submarines are patrolling theirs all the time, but doing so undetected, and then Russia announcing it. All right, this is also part of this whole backdrop now of geopolitics that is taking place between in my opinion, the totally insane and corrupt financial oligarchs of the West and the more authoritarian oligarchs of the East, who, for whatever their faults domestically, are at least on the international scene pointing out that the danger in the world is at least now coming predominantly from the West and the recklessness of the West's course of action in the wake of 9/11. I agree with Webster Tarpley here. 9/11 is the signal political event of our time. All right, it is used as a justification for virtually everything now that is taking place domestically and internationally by the West. So this is the key element here. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to next week that is going to also appear is an article outlining the recent decision of the Argentinian president, Ms. Kirchner, to ban British ships from Argentinian ports, and specifically Buenos Aires. All right. So in other words, prior to Ecuador's decision, you see at least one of the major Latin American powers, which obviously has a long beef with Great Britain over what they call the Malvinas and what the British call the Falkland Islands. So in other words, all of the history now of the West's dealings with Latin America are coming home to roost, and they are serving increasing notice that they are not going to play along with the West, and particularly with the United States. Now, all of this is backdrop, folks, for something I think that's very significant. It's an underreported story right now. And if you go to the website, you'll find two articles under the tidbits column right at the top of the page. The first article that I want you to look at is a little tidbit that's entitled, "After Ecuador, RT is hit with a cyber attack." Now, the significance of this is that Russia Today, RT-TV, is the official international English language service of the Russian government. It replaces, in all intentions and purposes, the old Radio Moscow, all right? It is a much more sophisticated media operation than ever obtained underneath the former communist regime of the Soviet Union. It's much more sophisticated. They do real journalism. They report on news and stories in the West that the Western media do not talk about. So in other words, I believe that what you have with the cyber attack on RT-TV is a direct response not only to Russia's support and criticism of the West and the way it's handled Assange, but also perhaps for that quiet, behind-the-scenes negotiation that was taking place, most likely, in my opinion, between Quito and Moscow prior to Ecuador's announcement that it was offering political asylum to Julian Assange. Now, in addition to that, there's another tidbit I want to draw your attention to on the website, all right, and it's also a very important one. The other tidbit is right at the top of the page, and it's entitled, "Hacking Group Anonymous Takes Down UK Government Websites." All right. Now, I've said all along that Anonymous looks to me to be a group, a hacking group, that has to have at some point some major power backing. It has been my suspicion all along that it is not necessarily the case that it is a Western group. My mind is still not made up on that. It could be Western, but I have my misgivings. I have my doubts. Now, it's interesting to me that Anonymous targeted the UK after the cyber attack on RT-TV. All right. In other words, I think you may have an indication here, connecting all these dots, that at least some part of Anonymous is getting some sort of support, if not directly from Russia, then through some sort of intelligence cutout, all right, and possibly from China as well. This is a response, in other words, to the attack on Russia's official state media organs. So cyber war is now going on in the background, coupled with the geopolitics that has been surrounding the Assange case. Now, This leads me to a little prediction that I want to make. I think what you're going to see now is a stepped up campaign by both the West and Russia and China, the so-called BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China. I think you're going to see now a stepped up situation of these types of cyber and other forms of covert warfare going on between the West and Russia and China, Brazil possibly, and India. All right, I think this is only going to increase as this geopolitical situation becomes much more tense. I think you're going to see asymmetrical responses. In other words, the West has been playing the covert operations cards to the hilt in Libya, in the Sudan, Darfur, now more recently in Syria. All right, we've seen all of these things being more or less driven and sponsored. I think you're going to see now a stepped up commitment on the part of the BRICS nations to covert responses to the West, and it will come in precisely these types of soft forms. And if those don't work, I think you're going to see even more notched up sorts of insurrection or guerrilla sponsorship or what have you. So I think the situation is going to become very tense. This is my guess. I hope it's a reasonably argued guess as to how the BRICS nations are going to respond. The situation was just notched up a little bit in terms of tension with these cyber warfare attacks. All right. That said, folks, I want to thank everybody again for your generosity, for your prayers, for your support, for your donations, for your memberships. I want to thank all those people sending me articles and news items that you think are of interest. I can barely keep up with doing research on the books and blogging for the website, but I do appreciate everybody sending me these things, because a lot of you, this tells me what you're interested in, and a lot of you are finding things that I think more or less dovetail with where I'm going with some of these ideas. So anyway, I want to thank everybody again, and I'll see you all on the flip side, everybody. God bless.